So thank you for FPF inviting me to be here, and which gave me an excellent opportunity to talk about the latest legislation for food packaging in China, and also provide a platform for me to have some dialogue with the experts and the representative from industry in Switzerland. Okay. Yep. I would like to. Sorry. Okay, it was. I'd like to show you why China need to reform their whole legislation system for food packaging and make a and make a comparison, a lot of comparison between the China, EU, and FDA. And finally, I would like to make some, my opinion for the challenge I had in China after the implementation of the new legislation for food packaging. Okay. Before I start my presentation, I would like to say a few words about my labs. My lab is a national reference lab affiliated to IQ, who is the quality watchdog in China. Yep. And my lab has been operating for more than 30 years. And the lab is based in Guangzhou, the third largest city in China, with a population more than 15 million. Yep. So it's also the capital of the Guangdong province. Guangdong province is the largest economy in China. So this is where my lab located. It's quite close to the highest building in Guangzhou, so it's kind of easy to find my labs if you have a chance to visit my labs. Okay. Okay, the main services for my lab could be summarized as 3 parts. We do some compliance testing for government as well as the industry, and we also do some standardization work, especially for the 3 years I'm quite actively engaged in drafting the legislation for food packaging in China. And also, as the National Reference Lab, we need to do some research program regarding, the migration as well as the risk assessment for food packaging. Yep. So it's quite similar to what FPF do. We also host some scientific activities in China. For instance, we hold a scientific conference on a regular basis in China to try to raise the awareness of the industry, to have a better understanding the safety of food packaging as well as the food content material. We're going to have the new conference in this November take place in Xi'an. It would be welcome if you are interested to join, just let me know. English. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to, the topic I would like to present. Why China need to reshape their legislation system for food packaging? Because the reason is quite simple. It's quite complex and out of date, in my opinion. This slide shows you how much standards have been published in the past. More than 200 standards related to food packaging after investigation and service we done several years ago. And also those standards is not harmonization. So you can see various bodies and the institution getting involved in drafting the legislation for food content materials. In national level, we have the NHFPC, is similar to the Health and Administration, and also we have the AQSIQ to draft some safety standard for food packaging. And also in the local level, and the industry association has their responsibility to draft the legislation for food packaging. So it's quite complex system. And more than 80% of legislation implemented in 90s, and for more than 20 years had not been updated. So this is a big problem. So each body or each, I think, the institution getting involved in the legislation have a different interest, have a different position. For instance, could we take, I think, the food packaging as the food safety issue or the consumer products issue? So what you can see, the consequences is there's no harmonization on some certain key aspects. We have different scope, definition requirements for food packaging. And the approach to regulate the use of chemicals and raw materials is quite different in different safety standard and legislation. Yep. And when you talk about some plastic or polymer materials, we can see there's a different or even conflict restriction or limitation in place. So this creates a number of confusion when you talk about the legal compliance. Yep. And also this a big problem is we have a big gap between what we need and what we have. You can see, even though China has established a large number of legislation for food packaging, but it's limited to certain type of material or articles, plastic, and some steel is steel, ceramic, glass. But when you talk about the rubber, talk about the paper and paperboard, there's no legislation in place to regulate such kind of the material and articles. So what you can see, the consumer put a lot of pressure on the decision maker, a politician, to ask the government to do more to provide a higher protection of the health, human health. So it's time to change. Yep. And basically, when we talk about the reformed legislation for food packaging in China, we can divide into the 4 steps. And this reform job is led by a committee secretary. Under the committee secretary, there's a working group to take care of the routine job. I'm working for the working group. So that's why I quite travel a lot to have a lot of discussion and meetings in terms of the legislation issues. And we take 4 years to complete all the process to come up a large number of legislation for food contact materials. What the new legislation looks like, this slide shows you the theme of the legislation for food contact material in China. I would like to summarize the 2 main parts. The part is for the legislation or limitation, which include some framework legislation. We have the Postrelease legislation, and we also have some of the specific standard to regulate certain material and articles, like plastic, glass, ceramic, metallic, paper and paperboard, rubber, coating, and teeth. And we also introduced the GMP requirements, which means we need to look into the safety of food contact material in the whole supply chain. This is a big change. When looking back, we just focus on the specific material and articles. But right now, we need to look at, I think, from the supply chain perspective. To make sure the implementation of the new legislation, we need to develop a serious testing method. Keep in mind, testing method in China is also a mandatory standard. So we need to go first to use the official method to run the compliance testing. This is something might be different with the EU or FDA. Okay, this slide show you some latest development for some new legislations. There are 4 legislations for food contact materials are underway. Wood, bamboo, and cork, we call WBC. We are developing the new legislation because Chinese would quite I think, to like to prefer to use the wood or bamboo, to contact the food. And also developing the legislation for adhesive and laminated material, as well as the inks. I'm leading the team to take care of the 3 legislation: WBC, laminated material, and inks. So it would be welcome if anyone here would like to, I think, to present your comment or suggestion on these legislations. Just let me know. Just approach me. It would be appreciated, because we want the legislation much better and easy to remember, easy to understand, and easy to implement. And also, the National Risk Assessment Center also do some research to think about, maybe we need in China, we need to apply new parameters for risk assessment based on the Chinese actual situation, because the consumption pattern, the way the Chinese pack the food might be different with the approach in EU or in United States. So we are thinking to could we find a good approach to take a risk assessment in China. Okay. Well, actually, what you can see, the new legislation, when the legislation come out, what you can see is we made a fundamental change compared to the old system. We use safety replace the hygiene standard, and we use the positive risk approach to replace negative approach. And we also like to cover the whole supply chain. And when we talk about the limitation, we not only focus on some general items like the overall migration, we also look at the specific migration limits. And also the testing condition is quite complex to reflect intended use. Edu has some introduction on the approaches. We are quite similar with the approach taken in EU. Yep. I'm not an expert on the system in EU and United States. For the reference purpose, I make some rough comparison. Okay. When looking at the system in place in EU, China, and United States, what I can say is China is aimed to establish a uniform and mandatory legislation system covering various food content material. This is, I think, the central government would like us to do. And also, they would like to do before, as early as possible. So we receive some heavy pressures from the senior official and also from the consumers to push us to do more and do quickly. And for EU, what you can see, for plastic, it's harmonizing in EU level. But for the non-plastic, it's regulated in member states. Yep. And FDA, I don't know if I say it's correct. I can see the FDA just focus on the specific material and article. And current stage is focused on the plastic and paper. Yep. Yep. The Postrelease is quite important in Chinese legislation. You can see Chinese GB 9685 regulates not only the additives, but also cover the postrelease, monomer. Yeah, because we are quite concerned about the safety, the risk of the finished products. Not only I think focus on the monomer and starting substances, we need to look at the safety of the finished products. So that's why the Postrelease also regulates those plastic resin. Yep. And one of the, I think the main difference between China and United States, to regulate the chemical substances to be used in the manufacture of food contact material is in United States, FCN is only effect for the manufacturer in the notification. But in China and EU, sorry for the mistake, the substance or material listed in the notification or listed in the GB 9685 is acceptable for industry, for the company, for the public. Because we would like to broad information to the, I think, the shareholders. And regarding the restriction and limitation, the Chinese approach is quite similar to the EU, but just keep in mind, China also continue employ some screening items for the purpose of official control. Because in China, the local authority always would like to, the restriction or limitation is clear, simple to be, I think, implement. So based on the I think the situation, we adapt some screening items like this one. Yep, heavy metals, consumption of potassium permanent negative consumption. Yeah, to allow the authority to run, I think, the basic compliance check. Okay, when you talk about the testing methods, we share the same principle. We would like to apply the several tests to run the compliance test. And this principle is applicable to most of the food contact materials in China. But looking at the EU, this principle simply refers to plastic. Yep. So this is some difficulty I'm going to talk to later, because we apply this principle, create some confusion and create some problem for the compliance testing. So maybe in the future we're going to make some revision and the modification for the approach we currently use. And look at the testing condition used in FDA, it's quite simple. Maybe FDA applied a simplified condition to run the compliance test. And EU and China need to look at the intended use. Okay, sorry. I would like to show you slight difference between the EU and China. For the similar, it's a little bit different. We use the 4%, and in EU use the 3% acetic acid. Also in China, TANAS is not being listed in as the dry, similar to I think to run the testing for the dry food, because it's I think the heavy argument and discussion on the use of the TANAS. We need. I'm the person to encourage the use of TANAS, but I have some discussion after the discussion in our working groups. We couldn't, I think, make a common sense, so we have to make a compromise. Okay, but in the future we are thinking to introduce the TANAS into the food simulants. Okay, the challenge we are facing after the implementation of the new legislation for food packaging in China. So you can see in November last year, 53 safety standard we can call legislation, published by the FPC, who is the only body to take the full responsibility to draft the safety standard for food and food contact materials. And the majority of the legislation has come into enforce in April this year, after 6-month transition. And also for the framework legislation GB 4806.1 going to be go into effect in this month, which means it's quite tight schedule, not only for the industry, but also for the competent authorities to fulfill the legislation. This is quite challenging for us. So we are discussing, maybe we need to find some option or some approach to deal with this issue. Yep. I would like to adjust some of the key points when we're talking about the challenge ahead. The first, I think, the problem is use of chemicals set up in the framework legislation. Only authorized substance or material listed in GB 9685 and relevant notification issued by NHFPC could be used. But when you look at the, when you're looking at, I think that the list, just 1,400 actives can be used in the manufacture of food contact materials. So this is the big gaps. This is the example for inks. Right now, we just have around 200 chemical substances can be used in the manufacture of inks. But industry told me we need much more substance to produce the inks. And also, we lack of the protocol and criteria to run the testing to prove the function bears its work. Because we have some provision to say you can use the non-authorized substances if you comply with the criteria list in the slides. But for the technical points, how to run the testing, how to prove it, is quite difficult. And also for the GMP in China, because most of the manufacturers, medium and small enterprises, so they say it's not easy to comply with the requirements set up in GMP. So this is a big challenge. And also for some raw material, it's not possible to meet all the requirements laid down in the GMP standard. Okay? Now, we are talking a lot about the NIOS. And also it's quite challenging in China because there's no clear criteria or protocol available for checking the compliance with NIOS. How to perform the NIOS assessment in an affordable way? If we use the typical approach like the GC, GC mass, LC mass, cannot be time consuming and cost consuming. So we need to, I think, a new tool or new approach to perform the risk assessment of NIOS. Labeling and identification is also important provision in the framework legislation. Industry approach us that they say there's a lack of guidance for how to prepare labeling and to present the product information. But when you talk about the official control, the competent authorities always focus on the labeling and identification because it is a good way to tell us consumer how to use the food packaging in a proper way. And the DOC also is quite difficult because it's hard to collect information from the upper suppliers. The upper supplier is reluctant to disclose the detailed information to the end user. And the end user couldn't, I think, to process the DOC. But actually, this DOC is a mandatory requirement laid down in the framework legislation. So this is quite challenging issues. Yep. We'll talk about the official control. The competent authorities always raise the question, how to harmonize the approach in such a big country, since its clear protocol is not available at current stage. And also it's difficulty to fulfill the requirements set up in the positive standard because of lack of the testing method. Because in China, testing method is a mandatory method. You need to go first to the official method. But actually, there's no sufficient testing method available right now. And when I talk about the compliance testing, it's a little bit, I think, the difficulty because it's quite different when you compare the food analysis and the analysis for food packaging, because we do the migration testing based on the intended use. So which means you have some difficulty to obtain comparable results within different labs due to some reason. First one is technical issues, like how to choose, I think, the SV, contact condition, detection limits, because we lack of the TNAS, how to run the migration for the packaging intended to contact with the dry food or solid food. And also, after the implementation of the new legislation for food packaging, which it requires the labs in China should be experienced and knowledge. This kind of pose a challenge for the lab in China to run the compliance testing. Okay, go to the conclusion. A remarkable progress has been achieved in China regarding the food contact material legislation, and the legal compliance should be fulfilled in the whole supply chain. And there's the urgent need for the transfer of information from upper supply to the end use, DOC. Further reversion are needed for certain legislation, like the Postrelease or the paper and paper boat. More training and new tools for the compliance testing or assessment are needed, particularly on assessment noise function barrier. Okay, thank you all of you.